Christ is risen. What do we mean, though, when we say that? Did he physically rise from the dead, or just his spirit? Let's talk about that. Also, remember, if you like our content, be a part of our community here on Facebook and also on YouTube. Recently, my cousin sent me an article that he wanted me to read. It was an interview with a president of a theological seminary that she gave for Easter Sunday. And in the interview, this lady, who's a minister, who's the president of a major Protestant theological seminary that's highly respected, denied the resurrection of Jesus. She said that Jesus did not physically rise from the dead. Instead, she said that Christians have an obsession with the bodily resurrection of Jesus, and that is, in her words, a sign of a wobbly faith. She said that rather than believing in a physical resurrection, we should believe that the resurrection was an analogy, a symbol, if you would, saying that love ultimately triumphs over hate, and that's the real message of Easter. My cousin was pretty horrified by this, and honestly, I was pretty surprised myself. After all, as the president of a theological seminary, she kind of sets the tone for all the ministers that they're producing and training. But here's the thing, if she's right, and if Jesus did not physically rise from the dead, that means that Christianity is ultimately built on a lie, a deceit. And if Jesus did not rise from the dead, that means that ultimately there is no salvation, because our salvation came through his crucifixion, but ultimately his resurrection. So what do we mean when we talk about the bodily resurrection of Jesus? As I said, it's more than just an analogy, it's more than just a symbol, it's a physical event. Jesus was dead, and his body came back to life. And it's because of the bodily resurrection that Christianity spread. If Jesus had stayed dead in the tomb, Christianity would have fizzled out. It would have died. It would have been as dead as Jesus was. But instead, because of his resurrection, the Christian movement swept the world, and ultimately it conquered the Roman Empire itself. When Jesus rose from the dead, he had his physical body. It was the same body he had before, with the wounds in his hands, the wound in his side. Yet, it was somehow changed. People didn't quite recognize him at first. He looked a little different. Once they spoke with him, then they recognized him. Also, it was a physical body that could eat food. He would eat fish. He would drink wine. But at the same time, this physical body could walk through walls. It was a perfected body, it was a physical body, and it was an immortal body that would never again experience death or decay. Here's the good news. In Christianity, we believe that each one of us will also experience a physical resurrection like the one that Jesus experienced. Every Sunday, we recite the Nicene Creed in church. And one line of it is often ignored or misunderstood. We look for the resurrection of the dead. What does that really mean? Well, it means this. At the end of time, when Jesus returns for the final judgment, every human being who ever lived will be physically resurrected to stand before the judgment throne of Christ. And what that means is that every human will have a resurrected body, just like the resurrected body of Jesus. A perfected body, an immortal body. We're resurrected because otherwise we would not be whole. You see, human beings are body and soul. We're just as much flesh as we are spirit, and our body is us. After all, when you get sick, do you say, "My body is sick"? No, you say, "I am sick." If you break your arm, do you say, "Oh geez, my body's arm is broken"? No, you say, "My arm is broken," because it's a part of you. We are just as much our body as we are our soul. What happens at death, when the body and soul are separated, is unnatural. It's not what God intended for us. We were meant to be immortal. When humans lived in the Garden of Eden, there was no death. Death only entered the world as a result of Adam and Eve's disobedience. And with death came a violent separation that was never meant to take place. And so, to make us whole again, at the last judgment, every human being will be physically resurrected, their body and soul put back together, and they'll be whole, just like Jesus is whole. Now you may be wondering, how is that possible? After all, there are people who've been dead for thousands of years. Their bodies are nothing more than dust in the earth. What about people who've decayed? Or what about people who've been cremated? Well, nothing is impossible with God. God can put those people back together again. After all, the matter that makes us up, the cells that compose our body, are changing as well. As a matter of fact, most cells in the human body are completely replaced every 7 to 10 years. So our body is always being made again out of new matter, new cells, so to speak. In the same way, God can recreate our bodies out of new matter, and it would still be us. Think of this example. Imagine there was a wooden ship that was several hundred years old. Over the centuries, the wooden planks and the various parts of the ship had to be replaced. After many centuries have passed, every piece of the ship has been replaced but once, maybe twice. However, it's still the same ship. In the same way, God can remake our physical bodies out of new matter, out of new cells, and it's still our bodies. And so, when that happens, we'll be put back together again, body and soul, who were intended to be. What happened with Jesus at the resurrection is, as St. Paul says, the first fruits of the resurrection of all. In other words, what happened to him will happen to us. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, we will not rise from the dead either. So we need to understand this. Bodily resurrection isn't an analogy. Bodily resurrection is not some obsession that Christians need to get over, but rather, bodily resurrection is at the very heart of Christianity. Both the resurrection of Jesus and the bodily resurrection of us. Remember this on Sunday when we recite the Nicene Creed. We look for the resurrection of the dead. Christ is risen.